This is a Gilbride Productions video by me, Paula Stone.
This is the riparian corridor along Marshall Creek, as I was talking about. And before, you could not even walk through here at all. It was just so dense with persimmon, whitebrush, cactus, and there was very little grass down here because it was so smothered with brush. And this was an easy place to decide because we could get the payoff real quick, the psychological component that every person who works on land needs. They need to be able to stand back and after a few hours and see some progress. Otherwise, you would never have the energy to continue. But the previous owner had the area bulldozed, not down here, but on the uplands. And there must have been 50 piles, huge piles of brush that had never been burned. And we did not want any brush piles because we already have plenty of wildlife cover on our place. And we wanted to burn those piles because they harbor a lot of snakes and other predators of songbirds. So we were making a choice to kind of level the playing field more by getting rid of those unsightly huge piles that would smolder for days. And then at the same time, on those piles, we dragged out the brush from here and added them to, and slowly, it took us about a year and a half to work through all of this. And one thing that we didn't know was that there was Canadian wild rye in here. That's a really interesting phenomenon, perhaps you will notice, is if you start working with Mother Nature to benefit some of the beleaguered species on your place, you will see the response really fantastic in some areas, particularly in these lowland areas, so that you don't have to plant grass everywhere you go. But this was bare when we started, and it had all this suppressed seed bank and some residual plants in here. So this has been really nice, and it's shady, and we're still trying to protect the trees that are here and also find some other trees that can come up through the grass. There really aren't too many, so I'll show you what we've done in another area to try to have a plant nursery here for the next generation of trees. So this tree, we call it La Bonita because I think it's the most magnificent tree we have, one of the most magnificent trees we have. But you can look around, you don't see any young trees except we're seeing some soapberries move in. But I wanted to protect these young seedlings as I was describing before, and we had this old cross fencing. It doesn't look great. I'm not crazy about having wire fencing everywhere, but I am crazy about having trees for my grandchildren. So there's about 50 young trees in here, and we'll just see how fast they develop. We never water them or anything. And they're mostly cedar elm, hackberry, and a few soapberries moving in. But putting these in a few places is one way of investing in the future forest. One thing that is real important, and it's so simple that a lot of people don't realize how nice it is to have mowed trails. And we keep these mowed and so that we aren't so fearful of snakes. We have snakes here, and we've lost a dog to a rattlesnake. So it's real important to have pretty broad trails throughout these grassy areas, and actually everywhere, so people don't make shortcuts and make desire paths. But that's one thing you can do even as you begin to learn your land. Make a few simple trails so that suddenly you have access and can notice changes in your landscape. And if you have small kids or you have people that don't get out in the woods very much, this makes them feel comfortable, and they can really see a lot more if they have a clear path to walk on. And you can see in here the uncaged places, there's a lot of cedar elms, but they've all been what biologists call hedged. I mean, just kept as low shrubs. I just wanted to stop and show this tree, these two big trees behind me that have been impacted by storms, just to make the point that the more you get to know your place on this intimate level, the forest can tell you a story about what has happened in the past. And when I see this giant tree behind me pushed over yet still stayed rooted, and then it grafted onto younger cedar elms, there, at some point, someday, there was some kind of cyclone, localized cyclone or huge windstorm that pulled that tree down, and now it makes a bridge over the trail, but it's still alive. This one part of it had on the left had broken off, I don't know when, and then I was here when this right side broke off, like a clap of thunder and lightning, and this poor old hollow tree is still alive. It's incredible. Suckering from the bottom and the top. So, but it tells the story, and it's important to ask yourself, what am I looking at? You know, why does it look this way? And this is kind of a dramatic example of that, but and you can ask yourself that question with eroded areas, gullies. Why? How did that gully get started? And but every woodland has a story, and they're all vanishing in the Edwards Plateau from drought and overbrowsing. So the payoff for starting here and working and making a trail was, it bought us time to learn more about our place. It had an immediate reward. We could be in the shade and listening to all the birds and walking, and the creek is right to my right and down a floodplain. And so it's a sweet spot. It's a good place to start. Well, this pretty little thing is really lit up because of the rain. Is a tube tongue, Siphonoglossia, I think, and I don't know. I can't remember the other name, but it's everywhere. It's like a big component in the understory of the grasses. That and pigeonberry here. I've read that the historic landscape in our region was really more like a oak savanna. There were oak mottes and then open grassland, and then of course on the river or creeks there was more dense woodland, but it's mostly a savanna. So when we bought this place, this was another really nice stand of oaks that was completely smothered by persimmon and wrapped in one big wad, the whole thing with catbrier. So we removed that, and the trees started to look a lot better, but now they're looking bad because of the freeze. You see how the ice pulled down that branch. I'm sure a lot of people had the same thing, but also the army tent worms, tent caterpillars came and stripped the new leaves, and we're just praying that they come back. But the phenomenon that's really interesting, and all this is happening, all these changes and calamities and good things, is that soapberries, western soapberries, moved in as an understory small tree, and they're all rhizomatous, so they connect with one another. The parent tree is this scrawny thing over there, but this has, for some reason, built this connection with this oak mott. So if we lose the oaks, we'll have a grove of western soapberries here. And I'm not saying that's better, but it's something you learn by paying attention, watching. So now I'm going to talk about grasslands. That was really my thing that I'm most interested in, is restoring the native grasslands. And it's a very hard and long process. This area behind these logs. This shows you some of the size of the mesquite logs that the former owner had bulldozed to make pasture for livestock. Really didn't have enough land to support livestock, but that was his goal, and he cleared it, but then there was no follow-up. So this area behind the logs was once a tank, and it never held water except in big rain events. So that was one thing where we tried it in a microscopic way, trying to make a seed island by planting. We planted our first seed, that native grass seed that we planted was in the area of those big burn piles. They were like, 10 feet tall and 30 feet wide. When the burning was over, we'd rake those and add seed to that, hoping they could thrive and grow up and throw off seed. And then here we seeded with grasses too, but really not much has persisted. And until this year, I didn't have the full sense of how the choices that the other landowners made on managing this land limited what I could do. It doesn't look like there's a lot of erosion here, a lot of gullies, a lot of bare ground because the winter grasses are here. But I learned from a soil scientist that he did a core sample and he evaluated the type of soil we had, the series we were in, and how much organic material was there. So because this had been heavily grazed by sheep, horses, and cattle for so many generations, much of the topsoil is gone, leaving a harder clay and gravel base, and it's just very hard to get native grasses reestablished. When we first got this property, I went to every workshop I could find, every lecture on how to manage rangeland in this. This is the Llano Uplift in the gravelly granite area, and person after person said if you just let the land rest, it'll come back on its own. But I've learned through 11 years, now it's not over yet, I get that, it's not a very long time, but I think there's not enough seed bank left here for the land to recover after removing pressure of cattle grazing, heavy equipment, and by wall-to-wall cactus, which we also work to remove. So what you're seeing mostly that's green here is 3-on, but also the winter things like little barley and lots of Japanese brome and rye, which are introduced grasses that come in with the feed. And rye is allelopathic, meaning it suppresses competition by making it really hard for other species to grow with it in the same spot. So there's a lot of rye in the middle there. At least it's not bare ground. That's a start, but it's not a scar anymore, but it's not, the grasses just didn't suddenly come back. We'll see if we can find there's some better ones up here too. Well, I was talking earlier about how the landscape can tell its story, and this is what I like to point out to my grandchildren and to friends about my total projection on what this happened. This boulder right here rolled off of the outcropping at some point, someday, long ago, and this young live oak at that time, it bumped into that, had to bend over and grow around the rock. So we have named this after my son-in-law's father, Joe, because he wanted to clear the rock so that he'd never seen trees grow out of rocks. So is this restoration or conservation work? Not so much. I mean, it does help the tree because it was like over there. We'll walk over there in a second, show you how thick it was. That's one place I have that has the before. But it gets people interested and engaged in continuing to work and help out in other places. When you have this spot, you can tell that story to whoever you're with that time, and you can also remember the day that you worked there with visitors from out of town and what they learned, and how you celebrate place by engaging with Mother Nature to bring out some of the real markers of the landscape. And when people are here, they know, they're oriented, like, where's the house? Oh yeah, here I am, and I can go back that way to the house. I was talking to you about that tree over there with a big boulder by it. All of the area where it is now was as dense as this, just a tight woven thicket of tasajillo cactus, prickly pear, and white brush, and a few persimmon in there. But biologists will tell you to clear in the mosaic plan, where you leave these thickets for shelter and for food sources as a contrast to an open area. Some people like to park it out, and you could say this was parking it out because it had all been like this. But I think there is a balance for meeting different objectives. One, having access to areas for more work, but also leaving a thicket so the birds can fly in and out, and then having grasses where more pollinators and insects can go, which also feed the birds. So on our place, we have plenty of natural thickets. That's why I'm not making a brush pile. And all around us, the property, a lot of it's absentee owned, so it's nothing but a thicket. So this is the contrast that we're trying to explore, and see how many more different things we can get on the ground plane besides just this, which has its own own value. So the wildflowers here right now, well, oh gosh, now I'll think of that. Saying this is prickly poppy, and this is golden groundsel. That's an early one. Phacelia, baby's breath, and pigeonberries coming in. So we're in this transition between early spring and early summer plants, and all of this in here will be Wright's coreopsis, which is a June plant. It's nice too. And granite dayflower, beautiful. Doing conservation management is a lot of heavy work, and it's not for the faint of heart, not for somebody who wants a quick fix, but there are some shortcuts you can take that actually help the land, which is don't burn all of the things that you cut off. These are some limbs that were broken off in the ice storm, but we're not piling up even the tips of those branches, because we just spread them out on land that is pretty bare. Like when these flowers are finished, there's very little growing here afterwards except doveweed and a few other things. So, but where the branches are, those become the protected places for emerging new plants. They break the heavy pounding of rainfall. They provide just a tiny little shade and create a microclimate that, and from browsing too a little bit, that's where if there's any new grass is going to colonize, it'll be under branch tips. And we always use branches in areas where we've sown seed in small pocket areas for that same reason. So that'll save you a lot of effort, not having to gather and haul things into big piles and then burn it, and that nothing gets any benefit from that. So you may not like the way it looks, but believe me, in our climate, it breaks down really fast. Next, I want to talk about this newest woodland area that we've been working on restoring. It's at the opposite end of the property from the first woods we worked in, and we had never spent much time up here because it was as dense as this 8-foot, tall-foot, whitebrush, prickly pear, tasajillo, surrounding trees, where there was no trail, there was no way even to start working on it because it was so dense. You have to get in there to cut down the white brush. Even that was a challenge. And I proposed this idea to my husband if we could dedicate some money to getting help out here. He says, "Why do you want to go up there? We never spend time up there." I said, "There's no there. We can't get up there. That's why I want to reclaim it, so that we can observe what happens and when trees are more spaced out, and if we can find more trees to bring and protect and have them grow up, that's going to be an interesting thing to watch." We're on a high bluff above Marshall Creek here, but this was once alluvial This is an alluvial soil, so it's deeper, sandier, and more moisture retentive than some other places on our property. But this whole area in front of us now, you can see, is full of brome and perennial rye, which is a real problem, these introduced cool season grasses, because they come up and they're so dense that it really inhibits the warm season grasses from coming through. The first year, even though this was totally barren underneath, it came up in solid wildflowers. We didn't plant any wildflowers, they were just here. And then with more sunlight and all that, now the grasses, the cool season grasses, have come over. We have some other warm season grasses in here, but it's a fast change, and it was really hard for me to understand how, in just something that had been so barren, could the next day be full of ryegrass and brome. It's just crazy, but that's what's in the soil, and that's what's going on here. We had a little bit better luck in the woods, but this is sort of a good case study to see before and after. So when we finally agreed that we would devote some money to clearing this, we had a great person to help us. That's Dale Schmidt. He retired from Texas Parks and Wildlife, but before then he'd been my local biologist, and he and I worked on several grant projects in other parts of the place. And now that he's retired, he was doing site work, but he's highly skilled and experienced. So, for example, he was coming in here, and he decided to go slower in some areas because he saw that in this tree, for example, there was a badger hole. Well, I didn't know. I wouldn't have known that, and most people wouldn't have. Also, I'll show you some more areas where in amongst all that brush, he saw some elms just trying to reach the sunlight. So we avoided that, and later we came back and fenced it. So he got his skid steer or bobcat and pushed everything into a giant pile, compacted it, and we burned on the same day. It was so exciting. And then when he finished clearing everything, we had a lot of soil moisture because that was right after the flooding in 2018 in October. I had about 40 pounds of seed, and I had all just broken it up into different bags for different areas. It was a custom seed mix, and I scattered the seed, broadcast the seed, and then he took his bucket and back drug over the seed and compressed it, and we had really good germination, as you can see over here. This is that stupid rye, but there's some cool season grasses here. That's Virginia rye, wild rye. And in the more open areas where it's a little sandier, we've had more of things like the side oats grama, green sprinkle top, and sand drop seed, and really good luck with sand love grass, which is a high value grass, high successional grass. And I saw little patches of it here, but this is the first place it's really started to increase. Cattle really like it, so it was totally grazed out. The most important thing when you're planting grasses is you have to have a custom mix. Over-the-counter mixes are rarely successful because you have to have the right assortment for your specific location. You can get help with this from your Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist, from your NRCS person, and also from certain seed vendors. And you need to have at least 8 to 12 species, and they need to be divided up for early successional species, 4 mid-successional, and 4 aspirational species like little blue stem or yellow Indian grass. I have not had very good luck, or any luck really, with those grasses from seed, but you always put a few in, just hoping something lines up for them to become reestablished. And I'll show you what I've done to kind of compensate for that in a minute. So when Dale was first started, we had this decision to make. Do we want to get this area 100% clear of white brush, 70% clear, or 50%? Do we go for more area, less groomed, less thoroughly cleaned, or do you go a smaller area to get as much of it cleared so it doesn't immediately revert to a thicket? So that's hard to decide, but now what we decided to go heavily cleared here and less going forward, so we at least have access to the southernmost parts of this 4.5 acre plot, so that over time it's a continuous process. It's not just when the contractor leaves. I've still got years of work to do here, but I'm hoping that I've planted the seed, and now if I could just keep the white brush from coming back, we can have access in here to walk around and notice what's appearing that wasn't here before, because we did a plant census every year, and it's really interesting to see what shows up. Every year is favors some the other plants, so you're going to see some years and some not. I mentioned that I haven't had very good luck with planting, with getting little blue stem to germinate and get established on our place. But over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been, in January, I'll go on the roadside and I'll dig up clumps along the road, especially where the grader has been, and they're kind of up on a sandbar, of little blue stem. And these have now become established. And I planted them under this post oak tree that sadly also had worms, and I'm just praying that it leaves out again. Had tit caterpillars. These grasses seem to like the fungal soil connection that's mostly under oaks. And traditionally you'll see, not traditionally, but often you'll see relict or remnant little blue stem colonies under the halo of a tree, because they need that soil, that relationship with the soil fungi to really develop their root systems and be able to thrive. So where I have planted this out in the open or out under a cedar elm, it's not the same. I can't explain it. So and this is what you can do without having to be an expert. You can observe, well, where is it growing on my place? Maybe just a few here and there, but where are they? The ones that look the best, and that will be your guide as to where you can start new colonies. And I've done it over behind you, Paula. There's some more. And my whole dream is that this will become very successful. It's a local source, and then the seed will fill in. And also what we have in here is this beautiful grass called sand love grass. It's not blooming or anything now, but it's very fine foliage. And here it is. So I think that's it. Still, we're so late this year for our grasses, but it's beautiful. Some over there. So seed, clumps, and natural recruitment. That's the only prayer we have for getting this to be the live oak savanna. And when we cleared it, we discovered that there were pecans in here and lots of other big live post oaks that we hadn't noticed before. And post oaks are in decline, especially from weather, from drought, from development. So I really cherish post oaks most of all. And you don't see any young post oaks anywhere. I'm just showing you what is left to do here, which is a lot, meaning the white brush or bee brush is a vigorous resprouter. And Dale was able to get some of those real big ones out, but there's all these little ones coming back. But at least they're manageable. And you can in one morning do a pretty big area just with loppers. And I treat it with a paint on remedy, which is triclopyr, which is a herbicide that will keep them from resprouting. But I have an old paintbrush and I just paint it on. It's a ridiculous level of detail maintenance, but it's nice to work in the winter out here when you don't have to worry about varmints in the grass, and then you can keep the pathways closed. And then we still have the thickets behind us for cover for the birds. So it's open and closed space, but I don't want to be right back where I started from in a matter of years. So that's what's involved. And also getting rid of the cactus, because we have a lot of hog problems here in Llano County, and they break off the pads and eat the fruit, and so they're the big spreaders of this. And so we're just wanting to keep it from becoming wall-to-wall prickly pear in the future. Okay, once again, we just got some old sorry fencing material and some T-posts, and to to protect areas where there are a lot of cedar elm seedlings coming back. And all around in here, instead of individual cages, we're moving in the direction of corrals for a bigger group, and they're doing great. They've already grown about 8 inches in 2 years, so that's good, or maybe more. So you can see how this is a cheap thing to do. It's a passive recovery, but it has a really good payoff. We have a huge American elm down there, but it's just a wide sandy creek, and since 2018 we have not had one of those gully washer rains that we need to recharge and refill the waterways. So, but there are pools of water all year round. So it's very good for wildlife. It's a highway for wildlife. So our latest project was in December of 2020. We had been given a grant through the Headwaters Conservation. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name of it. Regional Conservation Partnership Program through the Hill Country Conservancy and some other conservation groups were looking for landowners to help them with cost sharing on conservation projects. And we were one of the smaller landowners selected for this grant, and our proposal was to see if we could tell a difference in grassland establishment if we had a different way of planting it. We had been broadcasting it, but we didn't. We've had such erratic luck that I wondered if it was the delivery of the seed that wasn't properly done or wasn't enduring enough to allow enough time for those elements of rainfall, temperature, and everything to line up to establish grasses. So all of this area behind you, it looks green now, but it's mostly winter forbs and a few introduced grasses and a few isolated clumps of things like plains love grass, fall witchgrass, scribner's, rosette grass, but nothing solid. And so this area also was highly eroded over time. Not a lot of organic material, but it had more than the field in front of the house. So in December, Texas Parks and Wildlife came down, and our Region 4 had a no-till seed drill, which is a big piece of equipment with different seed boxes for different types of seed. The fluffy or chaffy seed and the heavier seed, like that would be plains bristlegrass or something like that, like little pepper grinds. So Jack and I had worked for over a year in clearing out boulders, cactus, hazards like logs and everything, so that the equipment could meander along, because it's not an old ag field with it's just squared off. So then when the no-till drill was delivered, they used it as a field day for other TPWD biologists to learn how to calibrate the seed boxes and set up the equipment and fill it with seed. We hired a local rancher to pull the tractor, and he was excellent because, like I said, it was a very irregular sowing pattern. So we're now in the time of year when some germination will happen, but we haven't had a very good rainfall this spring. We've had enough to keep some of it green, but we don't have enough soil moisture content for it to last once temperatures really get high. So I'm thinking we really won't know how successful we were for 3 to 5 years. But I know that we've done everything we can, and we will see if there's any difference or we get any kind of germination, because the seed bank was depleted, and we did our best to introduce more seed that was that was designed specifically for to thrive in this region. And so we'll see. Maybe the harvester ants won't steal my seed. Maybe the meadowlarks will steal less because it's embedded in the ground. But it's the only way to plant seed without a lot of soil disturbance, like plowing or disking would do. And and then the seed is there in the ground waiting for the right conditions. So I will be excited. We did 8.5 acres. I will be really excited to see anything grow here. And then over time, those species that seem to do particularly well here, then I can modify the seed mix to just maybe emphasize those and get. I want to reduce the amount of bare ground. I want to have grasses that can regenerate even if they're stressed in the summer. And I just want this area to be like a sponge, because the creeks over there can absorb and then slowly release out the rainwater. That's going to benefit the whole system. So it's very difficult to get this equipment, but you can find contractors who will come and plant at your house. You really need to have a big enough area to make it worth the delivery of that heavy equipment. But often, one time we did have a drill out here, and 3 or 4 neighbors got together and made that worth that operator's time to bring it all out and everything. And I had some leftover seed, so I shared it with my neighbors. So that was a good benefit too. But we're still waiting and seeing what will be the outcome of that big project.